thank you guys for joining us tonight. Tim Pearson, our CEO and founder, is here with us tonight, and I'm Jon, the director of sales for the company. We opened up Ohio a little bit over a year ago, and it's been an awesome market for us. We introduced Chattanooga Whiskey 91 and 111 to start up in Ohio, and tonight we're bringing you a treat, introducing you guys to Chattanooga Whiskey 111, Chattanooga Whiskey Rye, which is our Whiskey Advocates top 20 whiskeys of 2020 last year, and then our most recent release, our Chattanooga Whiskey Bottled and Bond. So typically how these go for us is I will kick us off, and Tim will run us through a presentation of who we are, how we got to where we are today, our style of bourbon that we've trademarked as Tennessee High Malt. And then once we get to the page of Chattanooga Whiskey 111, you guys will then drink. It makes it a lot more fun if we can all kind of drink together. And then we'll move on to Rye, and then we'll move on to Bottled and Bond. If you feel free to go ahead and pour your sample. If you have any other bourbon laying around, you want to warm up the palate, feel free. This is your show too, so do it however you'd like. But we enjoy all kind of drinking together. And then once we get to the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. So we typically like to stay on for about an hour and a half, hour 15, hour and a half. So 9:30, we can kind of look at things, wrapping things up. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Ohio has turned out to be a pretty awesome market. A lot of cask strength drinkers up there from what we're seeing on our depletions and numbers. And I really think you guys are going to enjoy what we have sent up to you guys tonight. So with that, I'll pass it over to our founder and CEO, Tim Pearson. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jon. Troy, I see a couple people just jumped in here on the in the waiting room. Sorry,
I got them.
All right, right on. Yeah, it's been awesome to connect with you guys on Zoom, and I really want to get into the market up in Ohio. I've been impressed with Ohio's consumption of bourbon. I guess I shouldn't be too impressed. You guys it's kind of a colder, Midwestern state. Seems like you might drink a lot of bourbon up there, but we've been doing a lot of these, connecting with a lot of great people. It's awesome to sit around and talk with people that are just interested in bourbon and interested in Chattanooga whiskey. So I really appreciate you all's time, and I'm really excited about the future of Ohio. And again, thanks, Troy, for setting this up. So I'm going to share my screen, run through the history of Chattanooga whiskey here, and let's see. And then we'll as I make it through this, we'll go through the products that you guys have in front of you, and we'll go through a tasting, and then we'll open up for Q&A and have some fun, which is my favorite part. I just want to have fun. So it was the history of distilling in Chattanooga pre-Prohibition, which Prohibition for Tennessee was early, relatively early. So it was about 1915 when that set in. So my co-founder and I discovered this history back in 2011, and we discovered that there were more than 30 distilleries in our in downtown region of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and more than 90 wholesalers. And it was one of the larger distilling towns in North America. And of course, the focus was whiskey. We're here in Tennessee, so we wanted to revive that. But we wanted to make a bourbon more than we wanted to do the Lincoln County process. It wasn't ever really our intent. But the main mission here was to bring a good quality whiskey back to Chattanooga for the first time in 100 years. We wanted to be the first, but there were laws that stood in our way to be able to do that. So this is a condensed timeline here in front of you. If you want to read more about Chattanooga whiskey, I would definitely encourage you to visit our website. We have a more in-depth timeline. There's also a lot of press that you can read some reviews on all of our products, and you can find out what the experts think. Of course, you guys are all, anybody who loves to drink bourbon, in my opinion, is an expert. And then, also you can check out our Wikipedia page too, if you're really interested in the history. It was a pretty wild, or it has been a pretty wild 10 years thus far. We just celebrated 10 years from the founding in October of 2011. And so it's been a great 10 years. But if you kind of look at this condensed timeline, we started in 2011. We started by trying to package together a product to be able to tell a story so that we could lobby to change the laws and just get our feet planted. Fortunately, in 2011, Lawrenceburg Distillers of Indiana, which you guys are probably very familiar with, is now MGP. It was a resource, and there were not a lot of resources to pull from if you wanted to work with a contract distiller back in 2011, but they were one of them, and they made a damn fine bourbon, and so we were really fortunate to have that as a resource to get us started and then begin to tell our story. We called it Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Reserve and Chattanooga Whiskey 1816 Cask. And then we also had a single barrel as well. We launched Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina. We were buying 20 barrels from them at a time to get started. And then MGP bought them, and we had to end up buying a lot more. So we ended up securing 1,200 barrels to really secure our path forward while we tried to figure out why it was illegal to distill in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So as we started this process to figure that out, we never hired a lobbyist. It was one conversation at a time, getting people in a room and figuring out what it was that prohibited us from distilling. And it really dated back to Prohibition. And it wasn't just Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was the majority of the counties. It was the majority of the 95 counties that exist within Tennessee. It was still illegal to distill or bottle or age or do anything related to manufacturing liquor. And that dated back to Prohibition. So this was going to be a really tough challenge for us. And in order to get to get some momentum, while we were selling this Chattanooga product made in Indiana, which was confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people were buying it. A lot of people wanted to know why it wasn't made in Chattanooga. We were trying to tell that story, but the only way we could really tell that story and raise awareness and start moving the needle with our legislators was to come up with a campaign. And so we created the Vote Whiskey campaign. If you Google Vote Whiskey, you can read all about Chattanooga whiskey changing laws. Because we started at a county level, and the county, we tried to adopt an older bill or adopt Hamilton County into an older bill. We started that process, but the county, while there was a vote, it was a vote to basically for saying that they were open to it. They were good with some type of a resolution, but we ended up having to form new bills after all. So it ended up becoming a state fight. And so we created House Bill 102 and Senate Bill 129 in 2013. And fortunately, those bills passed after a pretty decent dogfight and in spring of 2013. So almost 2 years after we started the company, we were fighting laws, and we got that pushed through in spring of 2013. Distilling became legal not only in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but it became legal in the majority of the 95 counties in Tennessee. And then the Tennessee Distillers Guild was formed, the Tennessee Whiskey Trail was formed, and a nice little craft distilling boom happened after that. So we're proud to have been a big part of that. 2 years after that, we finally established the first distillery in Chattanooga in 100 years. It's kind of fun is that it was exactly 100 years from 1915 to 2015. We established the Chattanooga Whiskey Experimental Distillery. We didn't really plan it out that way. We would have loved to have started distilling in 2012. But after the law change in 2013, we had some hiccups and it just took us a little bit longer to get established, but we still accomplished our goal of being the first distillery back in 100 years. I'll talk a little bit more about the experimental distillery in a second. It took us 2 more years to establish the Chattanooga Whiskey Riverfront headquarters, which is our distillery off of the Tennessee River, in 2017. And that is where we scale up our favorite recipes and recipes that go into distribution. That's where we do 100% of our product that goes into distribution. And then 2 years later, took us another 2 years to come out with that product. It took us 2 more years to expand into the 14 states that we are in today. And now, after a 10-year effort, our supply our demand has met or exceeded our supply in those 14 states. And so consider Ohio one of the lucky ones, because we are not planning to expand into any new states anytime soon. So let's talk about these 2 distilleries that we have downtown. One of them, the experimental distillery, what I like to call really the original home of Chattanooga whiskey and the birthplace of Tennessee high malt. You'll hear me say that a few times, and here is why. So when we started the experimental distillery, before building it in 2015, we hired Grant Mccracken. Grant is our head distiller. Grant was the head brewer and head of research and development for a prominent brewery, and had a lot of experience with recipe development and working with specialty malts. And Grant wanted, when he came on, this was a much smaller distillery than we had anticipated building. We were actually planning on building a much larger distillery, but we hadn't gotten around to that yet. And so because we're on in this experimental distillery behind, this is our tasting room that you see here on the right-hand side of the screen. Behind it is a whole production. You've got a 100-gallon Vendome pot still, 3 100-gallon fermenters, a 100-gallon cooker. And then we have a barrel cellar underground where we age all of our experimental barrels. But the point is you can only produce about 1 53-gallon barrel per week. So only about 50 barrels a year. So that's just not a lot. We really buy, in comparison with a lot of other distilleries, I would call that a micro distillery. And this was the first thing to really get our feet wet and begin distilling and making our own products. So Grant pushed me to kind of continue this trailblazing effort that we had started by changing laws and saying, hey, let's explore specialty malts in bourbon to the degree that no one ever has. Let's go for a deeper, darker, richer bourbon, versus doing an MGP recipe or doing one of many traditional 3-grain bourbon recipes. And so this was our test kitchen. I didn't know exactly how this was going to play out when we started this process, but I really am. I could not be happier. It's actually the thing I'm most proud of in our history is how many recipes we did end up developing, and that path it ended up taking us on. So from 2015 to 2017, every week when we put away a barrel of whiskey, we explored a different recipe. We explored different specialty malts, different yeasts, different barrel finishes, toast, chars, etc. And so, as you can imagine, 2 years into that process, we established the Chattanooga Whiskey Riverfront Distillery, and we have just an amazing inventory of recipes and really the exploration of primarily bourbon. We got outside of bourbon a little bit during that time, and we have as well at Riverfront, and that's primarily with single malts and some rye malts. But again, if within American whiskey and primarily within bourbon is where we focused. And because everything we did was greater than 25% in specialty malts, upwards of 100% specialty malts, we do not do the Lincoln County process. We do not charcoal filter. So we're creating our own style of bourbon. It is by definition, by TTB definition, it is a straight bourbon whiskey. And that is what we wanted it to be. But we were going after a specific profile and exploring that. And so we coined and trademarked Tennessee High Malt as our own style of bourbon. And that is what we are most proud of, that Chattanooga whiskey is the only Tennessee High Malt bourbon whiskey. And so now we've got 100+ recipes put away. We've explored, again, all of these different specialty malts, over 100 specialty malts, and within these 100 recipes. And it's time to pick a recipe and scale it up to the Chattanooga Whiskey Riverfront Distillery to replace this Indiana bourbon that we have been selling now. So now we're talking about 2017. We started in 2011. So we're 6 years in on working with Lawrenceburg Distillers, which eventually became MGP, and we built up a multi-thousand case brand on that label with that product. And we're about to rip the Band-Aid off of it entirely at some point in time by selecting these recipes. And we, after basically bracketology, our internal team narrowed it down to our final 4, and we got to barrel number 91. The 91st recipe, the 91st barrel produced at the experimental distillery was what we chose to become our flagship at Riverfront, and scaled that up, and then also created 111 out of 91 recipe as well. But there are differences, and I'll get to that. And then because we had done so many recipes, and then we started releasing these recipes into the market in August of 2017, we decided to scale up more than a dozen other recipes from experimental to Riverfront, which is what allowed us to do a crazy complex barrel finishing series with a blend of multiple recipes, 99 rye, a bottled and bond with a blend of multiple recipes. So when it comes to our capability of blending high malt bourbon recipes together, our combinations are nearly unlimited, thanks to the amount of recipes that we've put away at the experimental distillery. It's also worth noting that we have never stopped the R&D process at experimental. We have done now more than 360 experimental barrels. And we have scaled up even more recipes to the Riverfront Distillery. But again, all in the name of Chattanooga whiskey, the only Tennessee high malt. Lastly, the experimental distillery is one of the top tourist attractions in Chattanooga. So if you do have an opportunity to tour it, I'm pretty sure that you'll really enjoy that experience. So Riverfront Distillery, it's about a mile away from the experimental distillery. They're both in downtown Chattanooga, very different operations, but solely dedicated to one thing, and that is making Chattanooga whiskey great. We do not do any contract manufacturing. We do not do vodka. We do not do rum. We do not do gin. We do not do moonshine. We actually did an experimental high malt bourbon recipe gin, finished in a high malt bourbon barrel, but that was an experimental, and it was badass. And a lot of people wish we could do it again, but it's not us, and we don't want all the botanical oil all over our facility. So anyways, I know it's kind of a tangent, but that was the one time that we really veered off in a different direction. So the Riverfront Distillery, we produce, we can produce more than 3,000 barrels a year there. And, we're not quite at that yet. But we're putting out, a couple thousand barrels a year now. And so it's quite a bit bigger than that's, than experimental. And we just focus on making a great product there. So let's talk about what Tennessee High Malt is. This is one of our prized distillers Levi Zurich here. And he, in fact, Levi he's kind of over our experimental distillery now. But anyways, we have a production team of I think a 10, and of which 8 are distillers, and very proud of those guys. When it comes to Tennessee high malt, here's the thing that hope you see this diagram on your screen. There's a lot going on that makes Chattanooga whiskey rich and complex. And I think all these are important flavor driving components. I would call them equally important flavor driving components. But the biggest thing is that it's not just about the barrel. The barrel is critically important. The barrel is one flavor driving component. In my opinion, it's not 50 or 60 or 70% of the flavor profile if you're focusing on all of the flavor driving elements of making bourbon, not just 2 or 3 of them. So the recipe is critical for 91 and 111 and 99 rye. It's a 4-grain recipe. The specialty malts are critical. For 91, 111, 99 rye, 3 of the 4 grains are specialty malts. Fermentation is critical. You don't really hear much about fermentation in bourbon as much as you do in beer, but it's critical. Obviously, the type of barrel, the size of the barrel, the toasts and chars, and where it ages, all critical. And then distillation critical, and then finishing critical. So, and how you bottle it critical. So there's a lot of critical components, but you can see here that we major on a lot of those that makes Tennessee high malt great. And I'll get into the Solera barrel process as well. Oh, sorry about that. 1 second. So our recipe for 91 and 111 is non-GMO yellow corn, malted rye, caramel malted barley, and honey malted barley. Again, 91 and 111 share this recipe. Out of those 4 different grains, your malted rye, caramel malted barley, and honey malted barley are going to be, your big flavor drivers, or I should say differentiators compared to most other bourbons on the market. And what I like to really compare this to is like dark chocolate versus milk chocolate. So if every other, traditional bourbon, whether it be wheat or whether it be rye forward, if it's in the milk chocolate category, then working with these roasted, toasted malts is going to put us more in the dark chocolate category. And that's exactly what we were after, is this richness and complexity. If you're not familiar with malting, you can malt any cereal grain. You steep it in water, it begins to sprout, it opens up, the flavors open up, and then you kiln it. And based on time and temperature in the kiln, you can roast it, toast it, caramelize it, smoke it, etc. You can produce hundreds of different flavors based on time and temperature inside of a kiln. And it's what makes great beer. And I think we are really spearheading the effort of utilizing it in bourbon. And I think you'll certainly see more people using it in the future, but it is arguably the thing that sets Chattanooga whiskey apart, and it is the foundation of the only Tennessee high malt. So we've got our recipes. Now we're going to cook and ferment. Fermenters, when you're producing alcohol, historically, because this is the bottleneck in the operation, bourbons want to turn these tanks over as fast as they can. They just want to get to a distilling proof or ABV, which has historically been about 6% ABV. And you can do that with a short, hot fermentation, 90 to 100 degrees, 3 to 4 days. But the yeast, as it heats up, rapidly produces alcohol, rapidly exhausts itself, and it spits out lots of esters in that process. And the esters from the yeast can be very dominant in a short, hot fermentation. We chill our fermenters and we go more than twice that time in a fermenter. So we're talking about an average of about 7 days in a much colder temperature. And what that allows is for the yeast to not be as loud, and for the grain to be louder, our recipe to be louder, and then also for a secondary fermentation to really set in based on the natural bacteria from the air that settles into these open top fermenters and creates just additional richness and complexity. That's why we do it. We think that it's largely overlooked in the industry, and it produces a much higher quality, richer, more complex bourbon. We distill at a pretty low proof. Again, you guys probably know this, but to be a bourbon, it's got to be under 160. At experimental, we're distilling at the mid 140s, and that's because it's a small pot still, and small pot stills are they can put off a much funkier product. And so you kind of want to still a little higher proof to clean it up versus a column still, where you distill it at a lower proof to really hold on to more of that flavor. And so we are, because it produces a much cleaner product in general on a column. And so we're distilling in the low 130s. And then with our barrel entry, we go into the barrel at 115, which is also low. As you know, to be a bourbon, it's got to be under 125. And when we distill one batch, which let's just call, even as a column still, it could continuously run 24 hours a day. But let's call a batch one of our fermentations, which is a 3,000 gallon fermenter. That yields upwards of 10 barrels. So instead of all 10 barrels from one 3,000 gallon fermenter going into one type char barrel, like traditionally has been done in the industry, we take half of those barrels, so call it 5. There are 4 chars, 53 gallon New American White Oak, produced at Independent Stave. And then we take the other 5 barrels and we do a 3 char with a custom toast. So this is really marrying the best of 2 worlds together, because they're very different. 4 char is going to be a little more traditional, oak forward, vanilla. A 3 char is going to be much more toasty and confectionery. So bringing these 2 things together, commingling them after they've fully matured in 53 gallon barrels, is something that really makes Chattanooga whiskey special compared to the competition. So for Chattanooga Whiskey 91, they commingle after they've fully matured in a 4,000 gallon white oak charred Solera barrel. And this holds about 100 barrels. It actually has the 91st barrel from experimental in it, because we brought it over from experimental. But it is again a 50-50 blend of 4 chars and 3 chars with a toast. It's the same recipe. This is only Chattanooga Whiskey 91 in here at barrel strength, unfiltered, before we proof it down and bottle it to 91. But for 111, we do not go through the Solera barrel. We bypass the Solera barrel, although 111 is still a 50-50 blend of 4 chars and 3 chars with a toast. But it is also a single fermentation. So let's get into the tasting. So we don't have, I believe, 91 tonight. We've got 111 to my knowledge, but so you guys are, hopefully you're familiar with 91. It's just a super approachable bourbon that is, of course, malt forward and rich and complex. So if you haven't had it, please try that out, because again, it's light to medium bodied. You guys are all probably high proof drinkers, but highly recommend it. I'm drinking it tonight. It's a great product, and it's very affordable. So let's talk about Chattanooga Whiskey 111. So 111 is the big brother to 91 because it's the same recipe, 4 grain, 3 malt. Those malts.
Hey Tim.
Yeah, what's up?
I saw a question in the chat, and we were sitting here asking the same thing. So, is the whiskey in the Solera still continuing to age, or is that not the kind of barrel that it's going to continue to age?
No, I mean, it does. I would look at it more like a finishing vessel, but it's in wood. It's barrel strength in wood, not climate controlled, charred oak. I mean, it's definitely going to have, it does have an impact on the flavor. There's a chemical reaction happening inside that barrel. And so, yes, is the short answer, but we can't put an age. The only age statement that we could put on it would be whatever the youngest product is that is in there, even if it's only, one out of 100 barrels. It's really based on the youngest age. But we've had, before we even put 91 in there, we had upwards of 10-year MGP in there back when we were selling 1816. But of course, we dumped that barrel to fill it with 91 because otherwise it would have been a blended whiskey. So, obviously coming from two different states and whatnot. So anyways, I think it has an impact, but I would say it's more about consistency and complexity from the barrels, the 4 chars and 3 chars that we're marrying together from different parts of the barrel house.
Tim, is it just in there for a couple of hours, or is it basically just a blending vessel, or is it there for a couple of days, or what's that look like?
Indefinite. No, it's indefinite. It's the barrel stays full at all times. So there's approximately 100 barrels, 4,000 gallons in it, and we will only dump 8 to 10 barrels in a bottling. So when we're bottling 91, we'll draw, let's just call it, for the sake of easy math, we'll draw from 100 barrels down to approximately 90 barrels, and then we will that same day or the next day go and hand select 10 more barrels of 91 from the barrel house, 50/50 4 char, 3 char with a toast, and refill it. So you cannot perfectly extract any barrel out of there really ever, as long as that barrel stays full. So yeah,
like a giant infinity bottle, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, except we're not blending different recipes together in there. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So
we have the 111 and the rye, but the third one is the bottle and bond. It's not the 91.
Yeah.
Is that what everybody has?
That's my understanding.
Yes, everybody should have. So we didn't get the 91 because we had it the first time that we did it. So we should have the 111, which is what we're working on right now. And then we should have a 99 rye, which is my personal favorite. Yeah. And then the bottle and bond for, I think it'd be like their fall bottling of 2017. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So if you guys will, pour up your 111 samples, I'm sure you probably already have, and hell, you may have already drank it, which is cool with me. But the 111 is what's I would say it's kind of the crowd favorite in a lot of ways. Well, 99 rye and bottle and bond are both gaining their significant followings as well, but 111 is just kind of like the tried and true Chattanooga whiskey recipe. It's the 91 recipe that's unfiltered, and for your bourbon connoisseur, the texture and the overall body of it and how it coats your palate, just really buttery, and how the specialty malts, those roasted toasted malts, stand up really marry with the confectionery notes of the 3 char toast barrels that are in there with the 4 char toast barrels. And of course, the unfiltered nature, we're allowing char sediment to pass through into every bottle. And so if you pick up a bottle of 111, the odds are you will see a small clump of ground up char in the bottom of that bottle, which is by design. And so it just becomes like really chocolatey in nature. So I kind of like to describe 91 and 111 as a s'more. 91 is going to be more like the graham cracker. It's going to be the outer edges of the s'more, and the 111 is going to be the heart of the s'more. And I think that seems to resonate with a lot of people when they're tasting it. So that if a hint of like red fruit might be chocolate covered cherry, maybe a toasted coconut type finish, cinnamon on the palate, and of course that just lots of different kind of roasted chocolatey notes in there, maybe hints of honey, etc. But it's very different from other cask forward or cask strength, barrel strength bourbons, but it is certainly in that category. And so I love to blind taste people on it because it's kind of shockingly different, but it doesn't really drink its proof at 111, which is a lot of fun, and it becomes very approachable. And it's at a mid 40s. I don't know exactly what it's in Ohio, maybe upper 40s, but anything sub 50, especially in this with everything that goes into this bottle and at its proof and unfiltered and single fermentation, meaning we only pull from a single fermenter, one single batch when we bottle these things. At a sub $50 price point, I think is outstanding. I just don't see anything in its category like it. So we'll move on, and then we'll kind of jump back into 111 and talk about whatever you guys want to talk about with it. So we also have 99 rye. So if you guys will pour up your samples of 99 rye. Or maybe you've already drank that too, which again is great with me. So 99 rye is really a standout. It was our batch 007 out of the experimental distillery. Again, one of those batches that we decided to scale up. We loved it out of the experimental distillery, but that was on a 100-gallon pot still. And let me tell you the difference between, running the same recipe on a 100-gallon pot still versus a column still, and just the two different environments, it's like night and day. Yes, you get some similar elements of the profile, but it's very, very different. But we were so happy with how this thing scaled up. We loved it at experimental. We love it even more at at Riverfront. And Whiskey Advocate got a hold of it and ranked it top 20, number 18, and the top 20 whiskeys in the world of 2020, which was an awesome accolade to receive. And then it kind of, and because it's limited, we just don't make a lot of it. Kind of took off, and now it's hard to get, which is fun and frustrating. But we make a lot of different stuff, so a lot of different recipes. But we are continually making 99 rye. It is a malted rye, not a traditional like straight rye or American rye, which would be greater than 51% raw rye grains. This is greater than 51% malted rye grains. So it is certainly unique because of that. Sorry guys, I'm sitting outside. That's probably why you hear sirens. And I live downtown, which I'm surprised there haven't been more. So again, you're starting to hear about some of those things. You're starting to hear about malted ryes and coming out, but it does get merchandised in the rye family, because it is in the rye family. But those malted grains, like a chocolate malted rye, for example, or a caramel roasted, malted rye. I mean, those things are very rich very rich rye grains. And I would say that they're going to be, while they still have some rye spice to them, they're going to be a lot more, again, confectionery and kind of almost desserty. And it really lends itself more to the bourbon drinker than it does to the rye drinker, which is really fun because a lot of bourbon drinkers don't like rye, but pretty much all rye drinkers love bourbon. So we're finding a lot of crossover in 99 rye. So it's also 99 proof. We chose that because we thought that it was enough to give it some good body, but not be overpowering. And then, of course, from a marketing standpoint, fits right in between 91 and 111, which we love. So again, this is so it's about a 65-35 split on the recipe. About 65% of the recipe is made up of 3 different malted rye grains. And then the other, 35% is made up of our non-GMO yellow corn, which, by the way, I think it's worth mentioning that we work exclusively with Catista Farms in Middle Tennessee. We're in Southeast Tennessee, but so it's still local, but work with them in Middle Tennessee on our non-GMO yellow corn. So very proud of that. So what else? So again, long cold fermentations. This here says aged in 4 char barrels. We've actually since customized our barrels to rye. We actually are using 2 char barrels with a custom toast on our rye barrels now. So that's pretty cool. And this is a little bit older than 91 and 111. This is going to be between 3 and 4 years versus between 2 and 3 years. So for whatever that's worth. Again, stylistically, we don't really major on age, but it is certainly a part of our products.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the climate there? Because like they talk about it in Kentucky where, you get freezing and you get hot. And then in Texas, you get just hot all the time. And that causes it to age a lot quicker. I kind of get the feeling that Chattanooga is more temperate and doesn't get as cold as it does up here and doesn't get as hot as it is in Texas. So what do you guys do to deal with the climate there?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting conversation. I mean, I think humidity has a lot to do with it too. But just the style of your barrel house, the roof, the walls, what's in there, aging with it. So, I mean, we're more like a dunnage. So, I mean, like at Riverfront, all of our barrels it's all masonry. So the way that it ages really well at Riverfront. I mean, our climate overall is probably not too dissimilar from Kentucky. We've got hot summers, humid summers, 90 plus degrees. And then our winters are, highs of 40s and lows in the 20s and 30s. So we get pretty good range, but yeah, I mean, like overall, like generally pretty hot. Not all year Texas hot. So because of the dunnage, it really holds on to the heat really well for a long period of time. So like because of that thermal mass, I mean, if we have 5,000 barrels in a 10,000 square foot, brick room with a black roof, it'll be like right now, for example, it's decently cool here. It's lows in the low 40s and highs in the high 50s. But you walk into that room and it feels like it's 85 degrees, and that's because the thermal mass from the summertime, it just retains so much heat, which is a good thing. So we get really good evaporation there. But I mean, I could also debunk some theories about Texas based on our barrel room in at the experimental distillery. It's a barrel cellar. It's underground. It's basically a cave. If we didn't have a boiler and a chiller down there, it'd be like a constant 65 degrees or 60 degrees down there. But because we have a boiler and chiller, it's constantly hot down there, and it gets really hot in the summertime. And we have really high evaporation, but it makes a really great product. We've been really, really, really pleased with all the product that's come out of there. So I don't know. I mean, we have used in the very, very beginning, we had a hard time getting our hands on 53-gallon barrels before we had a contract with a cooperage. And we had the first like 25 barrels we ordered were 25-gallon New American White Oaks, I think 4 chars. And that was over oaked, in my opinion. Many of those were. And so certainly the size of the barrel has a huge impact, and the temperature does too. But down here, we're not going to be all that different from Kentucky. So when it comes to, I keep on doing that. When it comes to the 99 rye flavor profile, I think cola spice, like almost like a Dr. Pepperish, is a really popular one that I hear a lot of people talk about. And of course, it's that roasted toasted, you get a toasted rye out of it. And it is that is those toasted grains really showing up. And it's a very rich rye, and it's going to drink probably more like a bourbon than it does a rye. So, and then of course we price it at $40 price point, which I think is just a killer deal. Now, because it's limited, you might walk into a liquor store and they might have it priced for $60. That's not our fault. It's an ongoing conversation between John and I. So let's dive into bottle and bond, and let's dive into Q&A. Hey, John, do they have spring or fall?
Great question. In fact, I believe it's fall. Troy, it should say fall in there, right?
Yeah, fall 2017.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks. So this slide deck has spring, but it's pretty similar to fall. So it's funny. It's similar to fall in recipe in a lot of ways, but for whatever reason, I say whatever, for whatever reason, the small tweak of one recipe changed the flavor profile pretty significantly. So if you ever have an opportunity to try spring and fall side by side, I think you'll be shocked at how different they are. So our Bottled and Bond Vintage Series, you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with lots of Bottled and Bonds, and probably even where that came from, which was the 1897 Bottled and Bond Act, which was the government's attempt to regulate the quality of bourbon pre-prohibition, and the way they regulated it was based on age, having it be a minimum of 4 years old, based on proof, having it be 100 proof, controlling what distilleries it came out of. It had to come from a single distillery. And so, but the difference between our Bottled and Bond and pretty much, most, if not every other Bottled and Bond out there, is that opposed to it being just one recipe, it is a blend of 4 different recipes that were all distilled in the same distilling season, which is also an aspect of Bottled and Bond. But because we do so many unique recipes throughout, each season, every year, we opted for doing 2 vintages per year. We do a spring vintage and we do a fall vintage. So they were all distilled in the same distilling seasons within the spring and within the fall. And so, so you guys have the fall. We launched Bottled and Bond with the spring. And it is and by the way, it's worth noting, this is our distilling team here. This is Grant in the front, and our distilling team in front of Riverfront behind him. So with our 2017 mash bill, so this is the spring mash bill breakdown, but the fall mash bill again is not crazy different. I can explain it pretty easily. So you'll see B001, B004, B005, and SB055. So these are batches, batch 1, batch 4, batch 5, and then a single barrel 55. these were experimentals. These codes came from experimental. So batch 1 in spring was the first batch we ever came out with. Now, these didn't come. So Bottled and Bond was made. I want to be very clear about this. It was made at Riverfront, not experimental. But these were the batches that we scaled up from experimental to Riverfront, and that's why we have those listed like we do. So just to kind of explain, for the fall recipe, batch 1 was swapped out for barrel 91. So the 91 recipe, which is also the 111 recipe, went in place of batch 1 recipe, but they weren't crazy different. They were both, Tennessee high malts that majored on the malted rye grain, as well as caramel malted barley and honey malted barley. But then batch 4 was a Scottish style bourbon that had Simpson's peated malt in it and some other smoked malts. Batch 5 was a malted wheat bourbon that had a variety of malted wheats in it. And then 55 was a roasted bourbon that had a variety of different dark chocolate roasted malts in it. And so those were the 4 recipes that we scaled up. Again, in spring, B001 to fall was swapped out for 91. And that difference alone made a huge difference in the flavor profile. Spring was really complex with a good hint of smoke. Fall drinks a lot more traditional with a lot less smoke. It just tells you how crazy it is in the world of blending, especially when you're, not blending like 2 MGP recipes together, but rather blending 4 different, completely different high malt recipes together, but you swap one of those recipes that are pretty similar, and it just makes a huge difference in the flavor profile. So again, pretty unique that we're working with 4 different recipes. You'll see the percentages here: B001, B005, 4, 5, and 55, 17%, 17%, 33%, 33%. This is a little bit different for fall, but not much. But basically what I can tell you is that for fall, that 70+% of the recipe is made up of your malted wheat bourbon and your roasted malt bourbon. And then the other smaller percentages are made up of your Scottish style bourbon and your 91 recipe. And then finally, guys, we offer this at a $50 price point, which I think is just a crazy good deal, and it's part of our mission, which is whiskey to the people. And we are proud to bring a high quality, unique bourbon to the people at an affordable price point. You see some of the tasting notes here: spiced fruit, plum, wildflower, honey. It's 100 proof, so it's got a nice body to it. And a lot of people have actually said this before, that our Bottled and Bond has a wine-like finish, which I personally like. So let's since I could keep going, and it's 9 o'clock, let's open it up for some Q&A. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And
I was kind of curious, guys, by show of hands, how many of you guys have never tried any Chattanooga whiskey products? Okay, a few of you guys on here. Awesome. By a show of hands, which was 111 your favorite? All right.
Man, I don't know. Could have been.
All right, what about Bottled and Bond?
It was good. I think I'm going there.
All right. Awesome, guys.
Rye, don't forget rye, John.
I said rye. Rye was I must have glitched out. I said rye second. Yeah.
The rye was fire, dude.
Really awesome.
Yeah.
Like Tim said, we really believe that it's more of a bourbon drinker's rye because of kind of the breakdown and the grains that are used.
It has some very unique flavors that are reminiscent and suggestive of rye, but they certainly are. It's a nice bourbon to drink. So, yeah, very good job on the rye. But I still like that Bottled and Bond. That's amazing. That's that's probably the best bottle and bond I've ever enjoyed.
Wow. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah.
I've had a couple.
Oh. Go ahead, Richard.
No, it's just good tasting. The aroma, the flavor profiles match really well. The finish is nice. There's nothing off in those flavors. Frankly, there's nothing off in any of them, but the bottle and bond just stands out above the other two to me. So I'm enjoying the heck out of it. Still got just a little bit left to enjoy.
I dropped a note in the comments, because these are malt forward bourbons, if you were just to take, drop your finger and just a cup of water and just drop one drop, I think there were several comments how much these products change. They basically explode with different complexities and flavors that you might not have gotten as a neat product. So for those of you who did try it with a drop of water, what'd you guys think?
Yeah, it is funny how it definitely added just a slight opening and it changed it differently. Definitely changed it. So
That is
Seemed to get a
called
lot-
better living through chemistry.
Oh, yes.
Seemed to get a lot sweeter for me.
Right.
Yeah, I only did it with the bottled and bond. I kind of wish I would have had that recommendation with the rye to see what would have happened with the rye. I didn't do it with the 111, but I have a bottle of that here, so I can do that at another time. But with the bottled and bond, it just opened up like crazy. It made it just like brighter on the palate, a lot, kind of a little more peppery than it was, because I got with the bottled and bond on the nose all butterscotch.
Awesome.
Yep. Really.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So with the size of productions that you guys currently are having with the size, the amount of production that you guys have with the you said 14 states, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
With 14 states, do you foresee the same slow in growth that other distilleries have seen because of demand for your whiskey? Like, are you forecasting for that in the future to maybe create like a larger facility or up, because you can only produce like so much, right? So
Yeah, and by slowing in growth, you mean expansion?
well, I mean, like, do you see a point to where you're going to reach an output that is in such high demand to where it's not going to be on the shelf like you would like it to be?
I mean, that's the thing about just being in this industry. It's just so out of your control, because you're having to plan 5 years out, like everything that you do. And so, unfortunately, it's like bourbon industry is basically the world's slowest light switch. And so you cannot turn that on. Trust me, if we could, we might be in all 50 states right now. And we might be doing 3 times the volume that we're actually doing. But instead, because of the volume, and we are very happy with the volume we're doing and being able to service 14 states. But instead, what we're doing is while we're slowly increasing production and slowly, like we just got a larger still, we've got new fermenters coming in. I mean, we're actively investing in infrastructure to increase our volume, but we really don't want to outpace our innovation. And that's the big thing, right? Like if you just, for me personally, and our vision for Chattanooga whiskey, if I get fixated on being a million case brand, I can guarantee you that I'm gonna sacrifice a lot of things in order to do that. And that just isn't our style. We just don't, I would much rather carry innovation side by side with slow volume growth from here on out. And that just be how it is. And it's kind of like, look, we're not going to expand into new states because I want it to be, we've already launched Ohio. I want it to be available in Ohio. And if I go into 50 states and we already have states like Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Illinois chomping at the bit, which have obviously a lot, have a larger demand than Ohio overall. If we had added that many more states and had, California, New York, I mean, I wouldn't be able to get anything into Ohio. And I don't care anything about that. I want to service the states that we're in, and I want to innovate. And I want our distillers to have creative freedom, and all of our employees to have creative freedom. And so our distillers have a lot of creative freedom right now under Grant. Grant's the best distiller in the world, make no mistake about it. And I don't want to lose that by being focused on some crazy, volume number that all we do is try and put out 91 and 111, especially in today's world. If all we focused on was 91 and 111 and nothing else, I mean, like, for example, 99 Rye, Whiskey Advocate. I mean, I don't think it was, I think it was because it tasted good, but I also think it was because of our innovation that put us there.
There you go.
A lot of things, right? So that's all. So yeah, I don't know. It's a slow growth from here on out, I think.
I think with like the growth that you guys have shown over the past like 2 years, like there's like the demand is there. So like, continuing that output just to kind of bring in new chat fans, is always positive. But I think what you guys are doing right now is like the right way to go about it. Like we're only 2 states north, right? And you read the chat, like you can see that people are like, they're fans, and I couldn't imagine trying to put out
really
as currently do. So,
but what's funny is
look what you've done with your experimental stuff already. Imagine what that's going to be like in the next 10 years.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to what you're doing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of concepts in the hopper. That's for sure. And we're planning concepts out years in advance. These aren't concepts that we kind of like we dip into and go, okay, so like in the next 3 months, what are we going to launch? I mean, this is stuff that's been planned out a lot longer than that, and we've got a lot coming up that we're really excited about. Like I said, we are increasing volume, but we've got some innovation that we're working on. That honestly, kind of what I think Jon touched on it earlier. This innovation we're working on to be able to like push the envelope on a bottled and bond and push the envelope, like what all can it be? And these aren't like corner cutting innovations. These are innovations that take more time, more effort to produce something higher quality within, American whiskey and bourbon. And so it doesn't allow us to be the single barrel company we want to be. And I say we want to be. It doesn't allow us to be the single barrel company everybody else wants us to be. Yeah. And
there you go.
And so and we're just fine with that.
I was a hard convert to Rise. And if I would have had this rye to start with to get into Rise, that would have been one of my favorite ryes to start with completely. And now I'm sold on. I don't want another rye right now. That's so good.
You were a tough customer, buddy.
There's not a lot of ryes out there that taste like it still, and I think that's something that really put us on the map and separate us from, a lot of these other distilleries that are out there who are producing ryes. Again, with hiring Grant Mccracken with the brewing background that he had, no one's utilizing long cold fermentations and malts the way that we are. I mean, we've experimented with over 100 different specialty malts, different yeast strains, different barrel toast chars, different types of wood. I think with the experimental distillery, that's really what's helped us kind of hone who we are as a brand and be able to create new recipes to really figure out who we want to be in this incredibly crowded industry. So if you guys do get a chance, I'm seeing some stuff in the comments, come down, check out the distillery. Anyone who hops on these Zoom tapes with us, we're more than happy to set you guys up on a tour. If Tim and I are available, we're more than happy to walk you guys around. We're trying to build this brand as organically as possible. We've done over 100 of these Zoom tastings, from 3 people to 100 people. And I just feel like getting in front of people, letting them see our passion, really understand our story and understand Tennessee High Malt has helped us kind of grow this brand as, in the way that we have. So if you get a chance, come on down.
What else you guys got? Any other questions?
So I have a question about the experimental stuff. So as you find these experimental barrels and you're like, yeah, that's that we hit it out of the park. Are you like, well, let's remake it, right? Let's just do another one so we have it in 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or whatever that time is? Or do you guys say, nope, that concept's done and gone and it's time to move on to another one?
Well, we actually will not repeat an experimental recipe at the experimental distillery. It is practically against Grant's religion, because because it's not experimental if we do that. So the only time we really get to ever taste it again is if we scale it up to Riverfront, and then when we do taste it, we're like, damn, that's a lot different than it was at experimental. But yeah, there's always stuff coming out of experimental that we're really excited about. But it all is like, it all has to kind of be a part of our philosophy, and we don't want to do things that are too similar either, right? So
right. Well, that's what's great about the whiskeys that we tried tonight, right? They all stand apart from one another, right? There's nothing like you're like, yeah, that's kind of the same mash bill, that's kind of the same thing, right? So these are all very unique in their flavor and their everything, right? So that's unique. Yeah,
we're very proud of that for sure. Yeah, but all within, hopefully, as you're tasting three very different recipes, you're noticing that the theme of this Tennessee high malt is that there is a commonality between all of them, that they do have this malt forward approach, that they're all within this framework that we've built. And, instead of like having like 2 or 3 things that are just like wildly different, there are 2 or 3 things that are pretty different, but all kind of share this Tennessee high malt theme.
And then how many rick houses do you guys have? So, you talk about the experimental is more of a dungeon, whereas, standard rick houses, do you have multiples? Do you have couple giant ones? Or, I noticed they were palletized in that one shot. So
yeah, everything we do is, so everything we do pretty much is palletized. I mean, down in the barrel cellar at experimental, we house, even though we've produced over 350 experimental barrels, we've released a lot of those as well. So right now we're housing about 200 plus experimental barrels horizontally. And then, again, those are underground. And then at Riverfront, they're all palletized. So they're all vertical opposed to horizontal. And that's about, that'll house about 5,000. And then we have another barrel house across the street that will house another several thousand. Although we're not filling that one up yet. So we're pretty small, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, and but it's all kind of close too, right? So I mean, like you said, your other rick house is right across the street, so there's not going to be a lot of loss in the changes, right? If you're 20 miles or 50 miles away, there might be a variance, right?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think the variance could come from like going from a metal wooden rick house to a dunnage masonry 1-story, or sits on a hill versus a valley, or humidity change. But again, I mean, it has an impact. It does have an impact, but really nothing compared to the impact that a 4-char versus a 3-char, or a 4-char versus a toasted, or or any char untoasted versus a toasted, that, or the size of the barrel. I mean, that's the real impact. Now, if you're talking about like, Pacific Northwest versus, far Southeast, like major impact, but difference between those two. But if you're talking about within anywhere within the Southeastern region, it's really going to be based on kind of the facility that it sits in, And then, but what the larger impact is going to be the barrel that it's inside.
That makes sense. And like I said, the dunnage over at the experimental is cellar. So, you can't really repeat that, right? That's going to be damn near impossible to repeat because like you said, that's such a consistent temperature year round, except for the boiler all the time. Messing that up, right?
Right, exactly. Well, I would also just to add to that, I would say it's damn near impossible I mean, for us anyways, to repeat anything at experimental because it's off of a 100-gallon pot still. And it's just going to produce a significantly different flavor than a 30-foot column with a 150-gallon doubler. So yeah, there's a lot of variances between the two for sure.
As far as we know, the experimental is the only standalone experimental distillery in the country, maybe in the world, where every barrel produced is a different recipe. So it's pretty unique. If you guys get the chance to come down, check it out for sure.
Do you think you'll ever run out of tricks, out of recipes?
I mean, I think being innovative in recipes, it certainly has its limitations. I think it'll be a challenge, but we haven't hit it yet. But Grant and I have talked about it. We're like, dude, at some point we're gonna run out of ideas, and then what happens? But I think we've got so many in the hopper right now that we're kind of like the 5-year outlook looks really good. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a 15 to 20-year outlook, who knows what this industry is even going to look like, right? I mean, it could look very different than it does today. But so far, been really pleased with the bourbon industry and the commitment to quality, and it's been interesting to watch people go from hating the word blending to loving the word blending to now people having their own infinity bottles where they do their own blending at home, to people from hating outsourcing to now loving MGP no matter where it comes from. Like people so basically hating outsourcing to loving outsourcing. I mean, it's pretty wild to watch some of these paradigm shifts.
And while we're on the topic of blending, we got a good question that we always get. Which of our experimental which one of our experimental specialty malts just did not work? And obviously malt corn, and I'll let you kind of take it away from there.
Yeah, so we tried I've really loved most everything that's come out of both of our distilleries. But Grant and I got on a mission one time of really wanting to have an all malt bourbon, including malted corn, and we were working with a maltster to produce malted corn, and we started producing it. It was really expensive. I did not like that. I mean, just insanely expensive. I felt like this is not sustainable. Thank God. I was like, man, I don't really feel good about how expensive this is, because later on we found out that malted corn creates quite a musty note that sticks with the product over time. And we ended up hanging that one up on the shelf. Even though we did do a handful of malteds, and some people actually really liked them, but Grant has a real sensitivity to must, and didn't like it. And so I would say that would be one example of something that we explored that didn't work out.
So in your experimental stuff, have you guys experimented with barrel entry proofs? And how did you settle on your final barrel entry proof?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've really explored multiple proofs when it comes to barrel entry and when it comes to distillation proof. So 115 for us was a great reaction with the barrel, where we've got a lot of complexity in our product. In going in at 125, we felt like we were risking, just basically the approachability of you might miss a lot of that complexity. Also didn't know exactly what was going to happen with the proof in our facilities, and it ended up going up significantly. So we went in at 115, and now they're coming out. I mean, like the few single barrels that we do, I mean, they're coming out at like 121, 122. Some of them are even higher than that, just after a few years. So, I think it's a good thing because, quite frankly, like with everything we put into our recipe and our production process, I would not be in favor of single barrels coming out at like 133, 134 proof. I think it would just burn up the flavors on it. So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is it because of the humidity that the proof goes up?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think especially during the summers. I mean, we're a very humid environment, and that again, dunnage style barrel house is going to hold on to a lot of it. It's pretty humid in there, and so the environment just doesn't need a lot of water. So I think that's a pretty big impact if I had to guess.
Learned a fun fact while we were on this call. Actually, the average summer days are 88, and the average is during the winter 44 degrees.
I mean, come on, like I was pretty close. I did say 90s, but
no, I know. My dad hopped on the night. He's hanging out at the house, and he texted me a new fact that I learned. So I learned something new today.
What's up, Huggy Duggy?
Have you done any experiments with aging, as far as aging stuff longer? Obviously you started in 2017.
So we started distilling in 2015, and we do have some products out of the experimental that are 5 years old. I've watched MGP that we've even aged, not the whole time, but partially, go from 3 years to 12 years. Tasted it all the way through from 3 to 12. So if anybody who's a huge MGP fan wants to know what the best age is of MGP, I might be your guy to ask. Even though I don't like it. We've tried. I mean, Riverfront, we've got some stuff now pushing 5 years old, but stylistic. I mean, again, it's just all about style for us. That's the most important part. Do I think that some like 91 and 111, as they've gained a few months in age, have improved? I would say yes. I like the flavor profile with a few extra months on them, but I can't say that that's necessarily the reason or the only reason. Because I've watched bourbon go from one age to another, higher age that I don't like. So it just depends on the style. Like 99 Rye being between 3 and 4. I think it's a great proof or a great age for it. We've got some single malts that we want to see get a little bit older. So we're looking at those maybe being 5, 6, 7 years old when we release them. But I'm telling you, I think when you look at the process and you look at things like fermentation, I think if we were doing short hot fermentations, I think that it would seem a lot less approachable at a 2 to 3 year age. I just think it's one of many aspects. I think if we were distilling at 150 proof, that might also, if we were barreling at 125 proof, I think perhaps it would be less approachable than it is and less complex than it is. It's just how much impact I think the parts of the process leading up to aging actually have. I'll tell you this too. When we're doing, we're always tasting products out of the barrels. So remember, it's 4-char and 3-char with a toast. So we're tasting them 4-char only, and we're tasting them 3-char with a toast only. And we're able to compare those two. And your 4-char, which is the more traditional flavor profile, is, you know, and I'm not an advocate of the word hotter, but for the sake of the conversation, you know, I could see how a consumer would say, man, a traditional 4-char barrel appears or feels hotter than a 3-char barrel with a toast, because of that additional complexity that a toast, the caramelizing the wood sugars in the staves versus on the external part of the staves. Because remember, that bourbon's going in and out, in and out, in and out. And so if it's going in and it's grabbing raw wood and then pulling the char as it exits back into the center of the barrel versus going out and grabbing caramelized sugar wood and then bringing that back into the center of the barrel, it has a huge difference. And it makes, honestly, those confectionery notes make a younger bourbon taste significantly older. It's and significantly softer, and I would call it more approachable. So, I mean, it's kind of a soapbox, but those are, I think, all of those things are keeping us from going, man, we got to get to 4 years on this, or we got to get to 6 years on this.
I see. I noticed you've had a lot of finished products. Are those usually distillery only? Or are you distributing those, or?
So we have a barrel finishing series that port. Our first release was Tawny Port. They were Douro Valley Tawny Port. So I thought it was a phenomenal finish personally. And that was the intro. Those go into distribution. It is a small, pretty small batch that goes into distribution each year. Hopefully we'll be able to get some of that into Ohio at some point, but it won't be the Tawny Port because each year we do a new finish. So every year it will be a different finish. So we get that into distribution, but we're also doing like tequila barrel finishes, apricot brandy finishes, and that is out of the experimental distillery, and that does not make it out of the experimental. So anything we produce at the experimental distillery stays at the experimental distillery because it is from 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 barrel batches, so very, very small. So it serves no purpose to try and distribute it. But also it enhances the experience out of the experimental distillery. So when you do take a road trip to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and you do come and tour the experimental distillery, you'll be able to get something there that you cannot find anywhere else in the world.
Can you actually get it, or is it one of those things that people are lining up and taking your guys' stuff within days of its release?
I mean, it depends on what it is, to be honest. So it does sell out. Sometimes it sells out in a week. Sometimes it sells out in a month. But I would say, but historically, it's in that window. And it also depends on the size of the batch, right? So like a 4 barrel batch might last a little bit longer than a 1 or 2 barrel batch. So like right now we have a liqueur that's a citrus amaro liqueur with that is a single malt, an unaged single malt base, and that was a larger batch. I want to say that might have been closer to 4 barrels, and it's selling extremely well. But and it's been on the shelf for less than a month, and it'll probably be gone within the next week. So it just depends on what it is.
Is there like some of these distillers have clubs that, if you got with us early, you get to know about these things early, right? So, hey, if you want to make the road trip, let's make the road trip, right? Chattanooga's only a couple hours, right? 6 hours or so. I've made trips further for booze. So, sometimes those road trips are definitely justifiable or fun. And one of those things is their way of knowing ahead of time what's coming. And so you can plan those trips.
All right, I'm gonna tell you about a really, really exclusive Chattanooga Whiskey Club. It's called our email list.
That's why, I figured as much, but I just wasn't sure if there's, some of them have clubs that you can quote get into.
No, I know. Trust me. I actually want it. We talk about it all the time. We talk about doing some type of a cool chat whiskey club to have an intro to the product. I actually think that'll happen at some point in time, but it might be as we expand our Riverfront experience. That's something that we're talking about. But for right now, if you follow us on any of our social channels, but specifically Instagram, we're probably more active on that than anything. And then our email list, you can subscribe to our email list. If you go to our website and scroll down to our website, there's a subscription button there. And then we will send out a notice that we are coming out with a product. And then you got to plan your trip pretty quickly because it happens, not too long after we release the info. So that's the only way to really find out about it right now. But yeah, I mean, man, I hope we have a club in the near future because I want to hang out at that club.
Any plans for some of those long aged? I noticed a lot of people in the chat were talking about it. Like, is there going to be a Chattanooga 10-year single barrel or barrel proof or a barrel proof batch that's aged extremely long that you've found? Hey, we got this sweet spot in the rick house that keeps things really mildly and moderate, right?
I mean, I hope so, but I mean, it just isn't our focus right now. We're just we're trying to manage our demand as is based on the supply that we have, and also trying to kind of check all the boxes, which includes there's a million boxes, and one of them is assist in getting in the age of the product progressing, right? And progressing could be like 1 month a year, or it could be 5 months a year. It just depends on what we're able to do, what we're able to put away. But we don't have we're not putting away like a handful of barrels to say, look, we don't want to touch these until they're 10 years old. The only thing we're talking about being a little bit older right now are some of our single malts, because we just think it's appropriate for what single malt is represented. Again, that's the style. But no, I mean, I can imagine, I guess the easiest way to answer this question is, and like our single barrels right now are a little older. They're between 4 and 5 years old right now. I can imagine 91 and 111 being 4 years old at some point, and that being some of our younger product. And I think that'll be cool once we get there. But I can't imagine. I can't even comprehend how long it'll take to get 91 and 111 to 6, 8, 10 years old, just based on demand. We want to be able to service these 14 markets we're in. And we've got to be able to sell the product that we have to be able to get it out there. So it just doesn't really give us the benefit of, holding on to like 1 or 2 barrels and aging until 10 years is just not a priority for us.
I got a good question. I answered it in the comments, but with all of your experimentation, how important is it for you to be in a category like bourbon rye, bourbon/rye, instead of the broad whiskey category? And I kind of answered that with, us being Tennessee high malt, our own style within the bourbon category. Similar to Jack Daniels, Jack Daniels at its core is a bourbon mash bill, but because they charcoal filter, their style of bourbon is known as Tennessee whiskey.
I mean, I would say to be a bourbon, I mean, Jon knows this, has felt this more than anyone. I mean, while you're seeing American single malt grow, and now there's definitions going in around it and it becoming a legal category, and you've got Tennessee whiskey growing, and you've got rye growing, and really all these categories growing. At the end of the day, bourbon is still the most desirable, and having a really, strong presence as our own unique style being differentiated within the bourbon category is really important to us. I mean, you're not going to see bourbon plastered across the front of our bottle, because we do a lot of things that make it a bourbon and make it our own style Tennessee high malt. But we are a straight bourbon whiskey, and we do tout that. And so I think it's very important for us to maintain a strong position within the bourbon category.
So no Lincoln process.
No Lincoln. No. Now, hey, listen, I'm not knocking it. I think we chose not to do it for a specific reason, and that was richness and complexity. For us, we felt like, why explore all these specialty malts and then send it through a vat of sugar maple charcoal, which is like sending it through a vat of a Brita filter. But like that process is owned. You know what I mean? Like Jack Daniels, George Dickel, like they've got that process. Good for them. Let them have it. They have their process. We have our process.
I'm kind of surprised with your master distiller's background. He hasn't wanted to do like a stout aged bourbon or something more beer.
We actually, I got a whole story. Hey, Randolph, how much time you got?
Yeah.
I mean, so we had a whole series. In fact, if you want to research it, hell, I don't even know how much information is online about it, but you can research the Chattanooga Whiskey Native series. And the Native series was a back-to-back year, 2018, 2019, or was it 2017, 2018? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was 2016, 2017.
No,
it was 20. Yeah, no, it was right before Tennessee High Malt. So yeah, it would have been 18.
Yeah, I think 18 and 19, I think maybe, or 17 and 18. Anyways, it was a collab that we did with breweries around our region, primarily local, and we would send off our barrels to these breweries. They would age a specific style of beer. One year it was multiple styles. The next year it was all stouts. And then we would receive those barrels back, and then we would finish our bourbon in those beer barrel finished barrels. So the issue is because it was a beer barrel finished bourbon, the beer consumer loved it. The bourbon consumer did not understand it, and they couldn't really, like, it wasn't really worth spending the money. They didn't understand like why, like it seemed like it was a lesser quality thing doing a beer barrel, bourbon. So we went 2 years around it. It was a really cool collaboration. And then even during that collaboration, we started putting away these roasted recipes. When I say roasted, like high roasted, like chocolate, kind of chocolatey roasted, specifically for stout finished barrels. And we just haven't brought that back around, partially because I don't think the Native series, I don't think the consumer was ready for it yet. And the other part is because we like the deep, dark chocolate roasted recipes so much that we just want to hold on to them and not finish them in beer barrel finishes. So yes, it has definitely been explored a lot, I would say, not even a little bit. So,
well, that makes sense. I mean, plus what I've noticed with bourbon guys, at least, they usually don't have really great taste in beer for some reason. At least that's been my limited. I come from kind of a craft beer background, but when I see what most bourbon guys like as far as beer. It's like, I'm just a little surprised, I think.
It's a special thing when you come from a beer background. I'm a home brewer.
Yeah.
My stuff at home, heavy into craft beer.
Yeah.
Something like that stout beer finished would be fantastic to me, but obviously it doesn't like orientate towards some of the actual people that like bourbon. I have a bottle behind me right now that is in a KBBS barrel, and there's probably no people that would like that at all. But my family members like it because we all are coming from backgrounds of craft beer. But just like Brandon said, you might not have that.
Well, hanging around the wrong bourbon drinkers, Randolph. A lot of us like good craft beers and good solid beers.
Yeah, it's just when I see what the Busch Light apple thing and the blue ice cream beer, I don't get that. That's not really beer, but
sometimes you just need a poolside drink, right? I mean, sometimes you got kicked back by the pool and nothing like a Busch apple or or something along that. I just put my bourbon on ice. Personally, that's the best way to do it, right? So.
Yeah, my pull side is
Did you say
like
Busch apple?
Yeah, what is Busch apple?
Yeah, are you serious?
Seriously.
Busch Light apple, yeah.
Yeah, there's Busch Light apple, man. People go nutso over during the release time. It's ridiculous.
I just muted him. He's out for the night.
I'm not drinking Busch Light apple, son. I've never had one of those in my life. I've never drank one of those terrible things in my life. Can't stand that shit.
Busch apple. That's crazy.
All right.
I think
I'll cop to it. I've tried it. It's more like apple seltzer. I can't
They don't even
discern
sell
any
it.
beer flavor in it.
I haven't had a Busch Light since I was 18, I don't think.
Yeah. Keystone Light and Busch Light back in the day.
Yeah,
Suitcase, man, the big giant suitcase of Busch Light. That's what every high school kid had, right? You could afford it, $10 a case.
John, your dad's on here. You didn't drink before you were 21. Shut up.
Sorry, my bad. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Lawrence. Hey guys, it's cool because we got a lot of beer guys in here, and it's not something we really talk about publicly, but because the group's kind of winding down for the beer guys, I think it's pretty cool to note that Grant had a major hand in Sam Adams' Utopias. So for the craft beer guys, that was Grant's project that he worked on for many years. So when it comes to R&D, that's why we say Grant Mccracken is one of the best, if not the best distiller in the world, because this guy has such an extensive background with R&D, with one of the most prominent breweries in the world, that, he knows his way around grains, he knows his way around malt, and he's not scared to, try new things. That's why the experimental distillery, when we brought him on in 2015, he just treated that place like a playground. So it's pretty cool to see what he's come up with, in the past and what he's working on for the future. I think it's going to change the industry big time. I really do.
We're enjoying it so far.
Awesome. Any other questions? I know I've had you guys on here now for an hour and 45 minutes. But happy to keep hanging out. What any other thoughts or
closing comments?
Yeah.
So I mean, the future.
Nope.
What's that?
Say one other. Oh, go ahead.
We done in like 2 minutes.
Nope, I got to say, I was really happy to pick up my first bottle of Chattanooga down there at Party Source. I saw it up on a rack, and I thought I was getting something special, and it turns out I was. It was 111, and it was really good, and just a part of my bourbon life, but one of those where I really didn't regret buying that one at all. I've enjoyed it. Your whiskeys are good from beginning to end, and they have enough complexity to keep me interested in what I'm drinking, which is pretty much how I rate a bourbon. If it's complex, it's worth a little bit more to me, and if it's just a simple bourbon like a JW Dan or something, well, there's a reason it's only $15. It's good, but it doesn't have nearly the complexity that a Chattanooga whiskey does. And I appreciate your effort.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that, man. It means a lot. I know if Grant were sitting here, he would be very proud of that comment. So,
well, good. I'm happy that you guys work that hard because we really like it.
Thanks, man.
So down at the experimental, do you guys have like a bar, like where you can try a variety of various things that within the facility, or what?
7 days a week. You can, we're releasing new experimentals at this point. So 7 days a week, tours every hour on the hour. We have a full tasting bar. You could do a distilled tour where you just go back to the bar.
That sounds good.
Or you can do the 30, 45-minute tour to check out the barrel cellar and everything else. So like Tim said, it kind of goes back and forth between the number 1 and number 2 tourist attraction in Chattanooga, which if you would have told us that, 5 years ago, we probably would have told you you're crazy, but it's people really enjoy it, man. It's been a lot of fun to watch that place grow.
we're coming out with new experimentals like once every 1 to 2 months. So, the flight changes because of that, right? You'll have 91 and 111 there. You might have 99 rye there. You might have bottled and bond there, depending on the vintage, depending on the season. And then hopefully you have 1 to 2 experimentals there as well that you get to try. But the experimentals there that are there now, if you come and tour in 6 months, they're going to be different experimentals. So I just hopefully we're always trying to keep a really complex flight of 6, and it just depends on the season and what's falling and demand, et cetera. So
when's the best time to come down and try the different seasons? Like when's when spring and fall get released?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. So about 365 days a year. That is
walked right into it.
To me, it feels like it's constantly rotating over there. The citrus infused Amaro that I'm drinking tonight is phenomenal. And it's the place is an absolute playground. It's some of the wildest bourbons or high malt bourbons you've ever tried are coming out of this place. So really, anytime you come down, there's going to be something different. If you come down the following month or the month after that, there's going to be something different. We're always releasing. How many products, Tim, overall have we released to date, if you had to guess?
Over 50.
Yeah, 60. Yeah. So, Tennessee or 91, 111, Rye and Bottled and Bond are our staples that are on the shelf, but we released over 50 products, since 2015.
15, yeah. Or really 17.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed you mentioned earlier about mash bill, but I mean, the grains and things that you guys use and get, have you done vast variances in those? And do you feel those have a major difference in the flavor profiles you might get? Therefore, you could have infinite numbers of experimental trials. You could go back to the same mash bills, but yet different grains, different types of grain, how do I want to say this? Same grains, but different variants of, varieties.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll get outside that. We'll get outside the 9 dots for sure. I mean, for example, I like to use this because it's not all about like more grains is better or about more age is better. It just isn't. It just the science is it's pretty crazy. It's really about the exploration. And one key or prime example of that is a European oak high malt that we did that was a 2 grain. It was our non-GMO yellow corn, and there was a spring barley malt, and it was aged in spring European oak barrels. So like very aromatic barrels. And I mean, it was a beautiful product. It was something that I could totally envision us scaling up and doing again and again. But it was one of those things that is just not your typical grain, not your typical recipe, not even for Chattanooga whiskey, your typical recipe. And it was an awesome representation of what you can do when you explore to the degree that we do.
Bottled and Bond was comprised of 10 different grains as well. So that kind of gives you an idea as well.
Do you guys release your experimental stuff the same time, like every month, or is it just kind of when it's ready and it just kind of comes?
Yeah.
Typically when one of the experimentals runs out off the shelf, then we introduce a new one.
Yeah.
Depends on-
And even that could be a month or two in between. So it really has to do with when it's ready.
Cool.
Would you ever have two or multiples at the same time? Because hey, these all aged and popped out around the same time.
Yeah, we try not to double up too much, only because it might take away from the story of another. So, for example, we had four American malts, 4 experimental single barrel American malts. 2 of them were classified as American malts. 2 of them were classified as single malts, meaning they were 100% malted. And they came out basically, I think we released them every Thursday, 4 weeks in a row. And it was because we just didn't, I mean, yeah, you were able to get multiple of them at the same time. But we didn't want to release them at the same time because, it kind of devalues the story, and each one of them have a unique story. I mean, literally every single one of our experimentals, if you walk into that little, that cellar of what we call, Easter egg barrels, every one of them has a unique story. So.
All right, guys.
So the last, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
No, you're good.
I was sending it over to you anyways, Troy. You're good.
I was gonna say the last question I'll for you guys tonight would be, is there any plans for like anything that's gonna be a little bit more peaty, like peat malting? Amy asked this question, like an Islay Scotch, like finish, or something kind of like lean towards those like Scotch guys.
Absolutely.
Well, so we've got there's actually, again, the Scottish style is in our bottled and bond right now. And so there is actually a peated element. It's hard to find sometimes because there's a lot going on in there, but there's a peated element in both of our bottled and bonds, both our spring and our fall bottled and bond, which was inspired from batch 004 out of experimental, which is a peated bourbon, which was pretty smoky. We've done single barrels from that. We scaled up batch 4 to Riverfront again, which went in a bottle and bond, but we're also working on an Isla finish of that peated. So literally taking that peated recipe and finishing it in Isla barrels. Yeah, I mean, is it ever going to be like the thing that we do? No, but is it definitely a part of our history and something that, we continually will explore? Yeah, for sure. It's I think, it's one of those single malts that we do that is pretty cool. We've done some experimental single barrels where the Isla is like, the peat is really strong, but peat can be, pretty, it can be pretty polarizing. And so, we don't want to be like known for, peated bourbons, but it's definitely a part of our history. And I think a part of exploring bourbons and American malt and American single malt.
All right, guys, little hint. If you're digging the peat talk, don't be scared to come down here Q1 of next year. Got a lot of cool stuff coming up. Troy, as always, man, thank you so much for putting this together. I know getting these samples out and trying to herd a bunch of bourbon enthusiasts to a Zoom call on a Thursday night is not the easiest task. But for those of you guys who showed up, we really appreciate it. We really hope you enjoy, learning more about Chattanooga whiskey, learning more about Tennessee high malt, and just what we've had to do to get to where we are today. And I hope you look forward to what we're coming out with in the future. With that, Troy, I'll let you close it out, but just wanted to say thank you again. And thanks everybody for showing up.
Hey, John, Tim, thanks for taking time out on Thursday night to join us tonight. In the end, we raised $350 for Shoes for the Shoeless. I'll make sure I post that that confirmation of the confirmation of the donation like later on this week. If anybody has any questions, you can shoot me a message, or John, Tim, do you guys have like a email address that they can respond to, or they can like send a message to if they have any other questions?
Comments now, guys. Tim and I always offer, I think I mentioned it earlier, if you're in Chattanooga, shoot me an email, or if you're coming down, we'll make sure to get you guys set up on a tour. If Tim and I aren't available, we'll make sure you're in great hands. But if we are, we'd love to show you around our experimental and, you know, our larger distillery, the Riverfront Distillery, which we don't do tours at. But if you guys were to get a big crew to come down to Chattanooga, like I said, we just had Mash and Drum down here not too long ago, and they brought a big crew. We will be more than happy to set aside a time to walk everyone through and give you guys a pretty badass behind the scenes look at Chattanooga whiskey. So let us know.
Yep. And John, even though John put his email in the chat box, but also just for simplicity, info@Chattanooga Whiskey is a really easy email to go through as well. And I get all of those emails. So feel free to email info@ChattanoogaWhiskey.com as well.
Keep on making good shit.
So
You what?
So we'll wrap it up, and we'll say that you guys got to get rye in Ohio as soon as possible. But after
In
that,
Florida.
they are in Florida. Yeah.
You're able to find it in Florida. It does sell pretty quickly, but we definitely, Florida's a tier 1 market for us. So they definitely receive, and it's not as a pain in the ass to get it set up with the state like it is Ohio. So it's a little bit easier just to put it on a trip and put it down.
But we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We'll stick around for about another 10 minutes if anybody wants to stay on and chit chat or ask questions. But after that, we're done. I appreciate you guys' time tonight. Thank you guys for purchasing everything that you needed to be in the tasting tonight. Jon and Tim are always great. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thanks,
Really?
Troy. Thanks, everybody. It was awesome.
Happy
hanging out with you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all the great questions too.
That was great. Making so much fun. Thank you guys for being so engaged, and we'll see you soon.